I'm Colleen Appel. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a member of the Director's Circle here at First UU. The last time I delivered a message, I described my standard, very practical uniform of black and white. But I said that I hoped I could learn to dress outrageously to reflect my creative, poetic self. Today I can say that I've learned that if you invite your best friend to go shopping with you, you'll come back home with things you never thought you'd wear. I'm dressed in a jacket she picked out. It's a riot of color and pattern covered with a variety of flowers. I am feeling joyful and creative this morning. The message I am delivering is called Fireflies and Genius by Reverend Kaaren Anderson, interim minister at UU Fellowship of Vero Beach, Florida. We all know what it feels to like to be sad or mad or glad or very, very bad. We just do, right? Similarly, we all know what it feels like to be creative. Some of you may balk at this, but it's true. Mainly because when we are creative, we feel most human. For we are producing something both novel and useful in a particular social setting. We feel that magical combination of useful, unique, playful, productive, and sometimes even transcendent. And this is true regardless of what we are creating, whether that is a short story or an Excel sheet, a painting or a PowerPoint, a garden or an algorithm, a new curriculum, or a new ice cream flavor. The Unitarian process theologian Henry Nelson Wyman understood this power of creativity and even went so far as to associate it with the experience of the divine. Wyman defined God as a process, not a persona, an experience, not an entity. He believed God happens to us and between us. In his mind, God was a verb, not a noun. Every time we engage each other or ideas in a way that creates something new, we are experiencing God, the divine God. The divine God, he concluded, is the thing that drives us to interact creatively. It's the urge to bump into others and new ideas. Indeed, God is the new idea, the new feeling, the insight, the creation. For Wyman, this experience of creation and the novel is what we were built for. And so no wonder he proclaimed we feel most human when we create. Now, given the fact that the creative impulse is both sacred and magical, it's a little confounding why we don't seek it out more. Why, dear ones, do we conjure up reasons not to be creative? Because it's complicated. Perhaps it's more accurate to say, no wonder we feel most depleted when creativity falls just outside our reach. So my hope today is that we can explore some ways to pull the creative impulse back into our reach, making it more accessible and regular. Because let's be honest, this creative interchange is truly one of the greatest blessings life offers each and every one of us. I think many of us would agree that one of the primary reasons we get tripped up when it comes to thinking of ourselves as creative has to do with fear and judgment. We may have had an elementary school teacher that told us dogs do not look like pigs, a high school English teacher who told us our writing metaphors were stale, or a theater director who said we couldn't act our way out of our lamest lie. The world of art and critique are often way too closely related to one another. Think here of film critics, literature, dance, art, and theater reviews. Every studio art class I had in college, 70 credits worth, ended each assignment, no matter the discipline, with a critique of the work. Not a, hey, that rocks analysis, but rather a slicing and dicing of what you had just produced. It was a debilitating, humbling process often. The truth is, we've all had this experience somewhere along the line, and if it's not from professionals, it can come from family, friends, or coworkers. On top of the critique and critical eye of others, we can also turn inward and wrestle with our own inadequacies, comparisons, and self-judgment. We can so easily misunderstand that co-creation with the divine is not ultimately some product we create that ensures love and appreciation from others. It's not what secures our legacy. It's not a means to shore up and validate our self-worth, as if holding some magical power that if I could just be validated through this creative endeavor, the world would know that I matter. Can you see how dangerous this line of thinking is? It can get us completely devoid of wanting to create anything for fear of critique, admonishment, or judgment for even trying. I get why people tell themselves, I've got nothing. I'm a strictly analytical being, not an ounce of creativity in me. To which I say, hogwash. You are human, and thus your living, your being alive almost demands that you engage with the creative process. A couple of years ago, the beloved comedian Garry Shandling died at 66 years old. Garry was famously known in the comedic world as empathetic and kind. Not two words you would often put together to describe a comic. That said, The Guardian did a splendid requiem essay on his life in which they recalled Garry appearing on Jerry Seinfeld's series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. This particular show is a portrait of friendship and affection we might not typically associate with Seinfeld, who can come across as a very observant robot. But in the beginning of the show, the two men hug one another, and Shandling says to Jerry, I love you, and Jerry says, I love you back. Then the show follows them around in a Porsche as they make jokes and visit old haunts. Then at one point, Seinfeld mentions the comic David Brenner. He says, David Brenner passed away last year. Do you ever think about, all that material? Shandling laughs and says, I'm at a stage in my life where I actually care about the person. But Seinfeld won't let it go. All that material, you worked so hard on it, he says. It's just gone, and it doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. Then Shandling replies, that material and your material is purely a way for you to express your spirit and your soul and your being. It doesn't have any value beyond that, asked Seinfeld. It doesn't have any value beyond you expressing yourself spiritually in a very soulful way, Shandling says. Jerry, it's why you're on the planet. It's why you are on the planet. The creative endeavor, as Shandling says to Jerry, has no value beyond you expressing yourself spiritually in a very soulful, unique to you way. It's about expressing yourself, not impressing others. I love that. If we looked at creativity in such a manner, we would indeed let go of the need to leave legacy, to garner prestige, to validate our worth. We would let go of judgments from self and others because they are irrelevant to this way of thinking about creativity. The truth Chandlin offers us is simple. Creativity, our creativity, is experienced for our well-being, period. It is our interchange with the divine, our way to be made more human, to experience the vastness of the human condition, not to be judged or judge, or to be made worthy. Creativity is our way to express ourselves, not impress others. And so, guidepost number 1, if we want to keep creativity close, express, not impress. As so many of my artist friends have taught me, another thing that keeps creativity just outside our reach is our belief that creativity is something that we are. On first blush, it may not be such a bad thing to think of creativity as something that we are or have, but it's dangerous. And here, I'm going to turn to the ancient world to explain. The ancient Greeks and Romans didn't believe that creativity came from human beings. They believed that creativity was a separate, divine attendant spirit that came to human beings from some distant and unknowable source for distant and unknowable reasons. The Greeks famously called these divine attendant spirits of creativity demons. Socrates famously believed that he had a demon who spoke wisdom to him from afar. The Romans had the same idea, but they called that sort of disembodied creative spirit a genius. The Romans did not believe that a particularly clever person was a genius. They believed that in these cases, a genius literally lived in the walls of the artist's studio or bakery and would come out and assist the artist or baker with their work, help shape the outcome of that work. Which is kind of cool, mainly because it gave artists a psychological construct to protect themselves from the results of their work. And everyone accepted this is how it functioned, right? As one author explains, if your work was brilliant, you couldn't take all the credit for it. Everybody knew that you had a disembodied genius that helped you. Likewise, if your work bombed, it was not entirely your fault, you know. Everyone knew your genius was kind of lame or having an off day. That is how people thought of creativity in the West for a very long time until the Renaissance happened and everything changed. The Renaissance ushered in the beginning of rational humanism. Now, rational humanism put the individual human being as the center of the universe above all gods and mysteries. So there wasn't room for such mystical otherness. And for the first time in history, at least in the West, you heard people refer to this or that artist as being a genius rather than having a genius. And perhaps in that change, there begins the big error. It's a little hard to have one person, one little tiny human being, be the vessel, the essence, the source of all divine, creative, eternal mystery. That's a lot for the human psyche to handle. And when the creative inspiration does not embody a creative person, when it seems on strike or on a long vacation, when the maddening, somewhat capricious nature of the creative process is intermittent or elusive, what happens? Well, often there is a lot of damning of self, of one's talent and spirit, which in turn makes faith in oneself wane. There is a poet, Ruth Stone, who used to talk about how a poem would come to her. She said that when she was growing up in rural Virginia, she would be out working in the fields, and she said that she would hear and feel a poem coming at her from over the landscape. And she said it was like a thunderous train of air, and it would come barreling down at her over the landscape. She could feel it coming because it would shake even the earth under her feet. She knew that she had only one thing to do at that point, and that was to run like hell. And she would run like hell to the house, and she would be getting chased by this poem. And the whole deal that she had to run, get a piece of paper and pencil fast enough so that when the poem thundered through her, she could collect it and grab it on the page. And other times she wouldn't be fast enough. So she'd be running and running, and she wouldn't get to the house quickly enough, and the poem would barrel through her, and she would miss it. And she said it would continue on across the landscape, looking, as she put it, for another poet. And then there were these times where she would almost miss it. So she's running to the house, and she's looking for a paper, and a poem passes through her, and she grabs a pencil just as it's going through her. And then she said, it was like she would reach out with her other hand and catch it. She would catch this poem by the tail, and she would pull it backwards into her body as she was transcribing on the page. And in these instances, the poem would come up on the page perfect and intact, but backwards from the last word to the first. Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of the long-standing New York Times bestseller Eat, Pray, Love, says this about the poet's description of capturing that elusive creative thing. Now, that isn't my process. I'm not the pipeline. I'm a mule. And the way I have to work is I have to get up at the same time every day and sweat and labor and barrel through it really awkwardly. But even I, in my mulishness, even I have brushed up against that thing at times. Ideas that come through me from a source that I can't honestly identify. And what is that thing? How are we to relate to it in a way that will not make us lose our minds, but in fact, actually keep us sane? And there's the rub, right? The way we think of creativity currently makes it hard to keep sane all the time because it involves self-criticism and judgment. Because when we are not feeling creative or inspired, we feel betrayed by our creative selves, and that is almost a suffocating feeling. It can and often does debilitate us. So friends, I need to just say this new way of thinking of creativity just opened up a new world to me, one that felt free, expansive, and way less harmful to self. Tom Waits, the musician, recently hit on his process in an interview. He explained that for most of his life, he was pretty much the embodiment of the tormented contemporary modern artist, trying to control and manage and dominate these sort of uncontrollable creative impulses that were totally internalized. But then he got older and calmer. And one day he was driving down the freeway in LA, and he had this moment that changed him. He's speeding along, and all of a sudden, here's this little fragment of melody that comes into his head, as inspiration often comes. Elusive and tantalizing, and he wants it. It's gorgeous, and he longs for it, but he has no way to get it because he doesn't have a piece of paper or a pencil or a tape recorder. So he starts to feel all of that old anxiety that rises in him, like, I'm gonna lose this thing and I'll be haunted by this song forever, and I'm not good enough and I can't do it. And instead of panicking, He just stopped. He just terminated that whole mental process, and he did something completely novel. He looked up at the sky and he said, "Excuse me, can you not see that I am driving? Does it look like I can write down a song right now? If you really want to exist, come back at a more opportune moment when I can take care of you. Otherwise, go bother somebody else today. Go bother Leonard Cohen." And his whole work process changed after that. Not the work was still oftentimes as dark as ever, but the process and the heavy anxiety around it was released when he took the genius out of him where it was causing nothing but trouble and released it back to where it came from. You see, he realized that this didn't have to be this internalized, tormented thing. It could be this peculiar, wondrous, bizarre collaboration, a kind of conversation between Tom and the strange external thing that was not quite Tom. I love that story. I am much saner when I think of my muse not in me, but as a brush with something that I can't quite explain. When conditions are right, I think of the process as being an expansive Midwest field of clover, and the sun is setting, and the fireflies are dancing along the tips of purple flower heads, and I can snatch them up, their light and their inspiration, like manna from heaven. When conditions are okay, but not great, it's harder work. I got to relax a little more and just give myself over to this faith. They will come around, and sure they do, if I can relax into it. There are always a handful of fireflies ready for my waiting ball jar. Of course, there are times when I'm not free to gather the firefly, it's too dark, or I waited too long, and I have come to think of those moments as a means to practice the deep trust I have that they will return when I need them. That I may have lost that one, but something else will arrive, sometimes by the skin of my teeth, but something will come. I have found this method to not only keep me sane, but it also gives me more freedom to let go and let God, which I know sounds strange coming from a non-theist, but I mean it as simply being open to the creative impulse that any creation I create is not totally of my own being. Someone once asked me why I don't have any of my original art pieces, as I've sold almost all of them. I have scans and copies, but very few originals. Truth is, I sell or give away my work as a spiritual discipline, as a reminder that the creative impulse is always available to me, and that when I can trust that, it doesn't wander that far, and I am free from my own self-tormenting worry, judgment, and fear. When I can have faith in my fireflies, I do indeed usher in beauty to my life. I am connected to something that keeps me grounded and whole and duly joyful. Henry Nelson Wyman did not speak of God with a will, intentionality, or consciousness, but rather as a creative exchange, an impulse to share and create with others. And in those creative endeavors, we will have transcendent moments. They may be fleeting or lengthy, but they exist and delight and gift our lives with unparalleled meaning. So friends, during this month of creativity, may we heed Gary Shandling's wisdom to express, not impress, and the ancients' belief that the creative impulse is ours to interact with as an external friend and muse. I do believe if the learned theologian Wyman were still alive, he would have a big smile on his face and a charge to get to it. Explore, have faith, unite with the creativity which makes you whole and alive. May it be so. Amen.